They said he never blinked, even when he watched them die, and when their bodies were found, mouths stretched in impossible laughter, eyes wide with a joy they never knew in life. No one could explain it, not the doctors, not the priests. Only one man ever smiled back at them, and he made clocks. That line was whispered across Manchester's dirtiest taverns and richest parlors in the winter of 1884. A year of soot-black snow, missing girls, and laughter heard through locked windows. No one wanted to speak the name, but everyone feared the clockmaker. He wasn't just a man, he was a fracture in reality. A quiet horror that wrapped itself in civility, with polished boots and a silver fob watch. Every time he visited, time seemed to slow, or stop, or vanish. And when the bodies began to appear, no blood, no signs of entry. Just that same sick smile carved into their faces. Each of them found seated, posed, surrounded by the ticking of dozens of tiny clocks, all synchronized to midnight. The authorities buried it, called it mass hysteria, suggested a gas leak, even blamed hysteria caused by novels and female nerves. But beneath the smoke and gears of Manchester's booming industry, the truth ticked on. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a message, a demonstration, a ritual of psychological dissection disguised as art. And the elite, they knew, they always know, because what the common man calls evil, the powerful call necessary. The laughing man of Belgravia was only the echo, the prototype. But in Manchester, in 1884, something darker was perfected. The clockmaker didn't kill to punish. He didn't kill for rage, he killed to reveal, and what he revealed shattered minds, rewrote memory, and left men doubting their own sense of time. You're not hearing a story, you're entering a machine. Every second from here counts, and once you've heard the final tick, you'll never see the face on your pocket watch the same way again. Stay with me, because this isn't about who he was, it's about what he unlocked, and what it still controls. Today, Manchester, 1884, a city of fire, fog, and factory smoke, the crown jewel of England's industrial revolution. But beneath the grinding gears and soot-covered skylines, something ancient stirred. The first victim wasn't poor, that's what made it dangerous. Elliot Braxton, 47, textile magnate, estate in Ardwick, and a known financier of psychological studies at the University of London. He was found seated in his study, surrounded by half-dismantled clocks. Not one wound, not one bruise, just that frozen grin stretched across his face, and his pocket watch melted into the shape of an hourglass. The coroner couldn't explain it. They wrote, asphyxia due to tonic seizure. A lie. Braxton's expression was one of rapture, not pain, and his eyes had been replaced. Glass replicas, with miniature gears embedded inside. No thief did that, no lunatic. This was design, precision, message. What the newspapers never printed was this. Braxton had been funding research into hypnotic suggestion, memory rewriting, and non-chemical forms of mind control. Documents recovered later in a sealed drawer revealed experiments on orphans and factory children, trials meant to test emotional thresholds, sleep deprivation, and obedience induction. He wasn't innocent. He was an architect of a system, and someone had turned his own methods into art and punishment. That's when the letters started, sent to Scotland Yard, unsigned. Each one began the same. You measure time with gears, I measure it with truth. Each letter detailed another victim before they were found. Names, addresses, final poses, every detail perfect. The killer wasn't hiding, he was teaching, and those who understood the lesson disappeared. The working men feared a demon. The scholars whispered about the artisan. The underworld called him the smiling watchman, but the most accurate name was found in the letterhead watermark of each note, a symbol of Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, a symbol of eternal recurrence. This wasn't random murder. It was a ritual performance meant to expose what time truly is, a trap, a loop, a machine designed not by nature but by rulers, kings, and clockmakers. If you think time belongs to you, it's because someone taught you that lie. But time was never yours to begin with. They found the second body beneath the floorboards of St. Dunstan's orphanage. A 14-year-old boy named Tobias Finch Officially, he was listed as runaway, presumed dead, but what they discovered beneath the warped wooden planks said otherwise. His body had been embalmed, not by a coroner, but by someone who understood preservation, like a painter understands light. His skin was waxen, eyes sealed shut with lacquer, lips curled into that same sick smile. But it wasn't joy. It was surrender, a child who had looked into something no child should ever see, and laughed, because it was the only defense left. His hands were posed in the ancient mudra of silence, a symbol found in Buddhist and Egyptian rituals. His chest, branded, a symbol, the face of a clock with no hands, only one word etched beneath in Latin, veritas ex hora, truth through time. Tobias was one of the test subjects in the Braxton-funded experiments. You won't read that in any history book. The orphanage records were burned the same week Braxton died. But truth survives in shadow, even when paper is destroyed. Inspector Aldwin Blackmore, a name redacted in all surviving case files, made the connection. He traced funding trails, interviewed surviving staff, followed the scent of secrecy up the institutional ladder, until he reached the Manchester Psychological Society. That's where it stopped. Every door slammed shut, every witness either recanted, vanished, or turned up dead. But Aldwin had a theory. He believed the clockmaker wasn't a man, but a program, a system, a self-replicating psychological virus, one designed to infect the elite and invert their power, to turn their tools of control against them. The gears weren't just symbols, they were mechanisms, mental devices buried inside minds, waiting to be activated. It wasn't about murder, it was about exposure, psychological unraveling. The killer's weapon wasn't a knife, it was timing, patterned chaos designed to fracture belief systems. The boy, Tobias, he was a message, a silent scream in a system designed to keep truth mute, and the whisper behind it all was this: time doesn't heal, it hides, until someone resets the clock. And someone just did. There was a house on Withy Grove they wouldn't speak of by name. It stood 3 stories tall, ivy-choked and blind-eyed from decades of dust-coated windows. Locals called it the House of No Sound, not because it was empty, but because no sound ever left. That's where the third body was found. Margaret Lyle, 32. The last surviving assistant of Dr. Calder Roth, a pioneer in neuromechanical experimentation, a woman whose brilliance terrified her peers. She spoke 6 languages, built mnemonic engines from brass and bone, and once delivered a lecture on dream control that was interrupted when 3 attendees fainted from what she called collective memory resonance. When she was found, her mouth had been sewn shut, but behind her lips, stitched into her gums, were dozens of tiny copper gears, not random, measured, balanced, mechanical implants wired into the soft tissue of her face like a grotesque timepiece. Her body rested in a brass chair, arms outstretched like the Vitruvian Man. Her chest was open, heart replaced with a winding key, and beside her, scrawled in rusted ink across the peeling wallpaper, she decoded the interval, so I silenced her measure. Scotland Yard covered it up again, declared it insanity by artistic delusion, burned the house, called it suicide. But the fire didn't destroy what they thought it would. Underneath the floorboards, Inspector Blackmore found a blueprint. Not of the house, but of a mind, a schematic of psychological architecture, symbols, glyphs, and phrases older than English but eerily familiar to anyone who studied mass behavior. Margaret had been building something, not with wood or stone, but with ideas, a design that revealed how belief systems are constructed, collapsed, and reinstalled. It wasn't just about clocks, it was about time-based obedience cycles. She discovered that fear, morality, guilt, then love, could be synchronized to external cues, like bells, alarms, schedules, calendars. Time itself was the leash, and someone had come to silence her before she showed the world how easily that leash could be cut. You still think your thoughts are your own? They're not. They're just echoes of someone else's clock, ticking in your spine. The deeper Blackmore went, the quieter his world became. Friends stopped answering his knocks. Records disappeared overnight. One morning he awoke to find his journals rewritten. Not stolen, not burned. Edited. His own handwriting, but different ink, different phrasing, as if someone had reached inside his memory and turned the gears backward. That's when he realized the clockmaker's work wasn't confined to death. It wasn't about corpses. It was about conversion. Every victim wasn't just murdered. They were repurposed, turned into symbols, warnings, or keys, and each one closer to the heart of the machine, a system buried deep within Manchester's elite institutions. One name surfaced again and again: the Verity Lodge. A secret fraternity of industrialists, surgeons, and scientists. Their motto: time reveals all, but only to those who control it. They weren't just rich. They were the architects of a psychological empire, orchestrating mass behavior through time-based rituals. School bells, work shifts, hourly prayers, factory whistles, not tools of order, but tools of mental compliance. They studied Pavlov before he was published, hypnosis before Freud, and they believed humanity was programmable, not by force, but by rhythm. The clockmaker, he was either one of them, or worse, one of their experiments that escaped the protocol. At their abandoned meeting hall on Deansgate, Blackmore broke the lock. Inside, gears, dials, and what looked like a confessional booth, fitted not with seats but with brass skull clamps and tuning forks. A ledger was left open, 3 names marked in red. The next, Inspector Aldwin Blackmore. He was never seen again. And yet, his journal resurfaced decades later, not in an archive but in a locked drawer beneath the floor of a church long decommissioned, buried beneath a stack of clocks all stuck at 3:33. The journal on is with a warning: if you hear ticking and you're alone, it's already too late. The machine isn't coming, it's been here. And here's the part they don't want you to hear: you are part of it. Every hour, every minute, every second you've ever obeyed without asking why was a tick in someone else's design. Now ask yourself, who wound you? By the winter of 1884, Manchester's skies were grey with more than coal. Something unnatural hung in the air, a quiet pressure like time holding its breath. Then came the fourth body. Professor Lysander Vexley, mathematician, cryptographer, and former advisor to the Crown on civil time standardization. He'd gone missing for 23 days. Found in the bell tower of an abandoned Methodist church near Ancoats, hanging upside down, but not by the neck, suspended by his ankles, arms bound in front of him like a clock's hands at midnight. His chest bore another carving, an infinity loop with a shattered center. Surrounding him were 14 metronomes, everyone ticking at a different tempo, everyone precisely labeled with a human emotion: anger, lust, obedience, hope. Each click was calibrated to a distinct neurological resonance. This wasn't just symbolism, this was tuning, psychological frequency modulation. Lysander had been the first man to argue for synchronized national time zones, not for transportation or communication, but for predictability of the masses. He believed chaos could be eliminated if everyone's life ticked in unison. And yet, when they found him, time had turned against him. A note pinned to his vest read, "He aligned the world to false rhythm. I realigned him to truth." You want to know the most disturbing part? His watch, still ticking on his wrist, wasn't telling time. It was ticking out Morse code, repeating 3 words over and over: break the cycle. Do you feel that? Not fear, not suspense, recognition. Somewhere inside you, a part long buried is remembering. Because this isn't fiction. This is a fracture in your programming. The clockmaker didn't just kill, he planted seeds in the minds of the observant, and now, 141 years later, they're starting to bloom. And you're feeling it tick, aren't you? Comma, not below. Break the cycle, break the cycle. Say it twice, not for the algorithm, but for yourself, to mark this moment, to shatter the loop, because after this, you can't go back. They came at dawn. 2 men in black coats, one with a badge from the bureau, the other with hands that looked more accustomed to choking than writing. They didn't knock, they announced, and Clara was ready. She stood at the top of the stairs, holding her leather-bound journal, her gray eyes fixed on the taller man's pocket. "Your service weapon is misaligned," she said. "Left shoulder holster. Weight distribution suggests your draw is slow. You were not sent to reason." The man flinched. Jacob pleaded. Liesel wept, but their words dissolved against the cold certainty of the state. The paperwork had been signed the night before, a complaint filed, a magistrate paid, and a removal order rubber-stamped without review. "Clara Weiss is to be remanded into educational custody," they recited. But the files never said where. And Clara, without resistance, handed her journal to her mother and whispered, "Hide this. If they take the numbers, they take everything." She left the house without a sound, but not before turning to Jacob and saying, 17 days, the man with the scar on his right eye will return for you. Do not open the door. 17 days later, Jacob Weiss would disappear, but we're not there yet. They took Clara to a facility posing as a boarding school, Westmore Institute. Perched on a bluff above the Monongahela River, the stone building reeked of mold and false charity. Its true purpose was never education. Westmore specialized in containment. It housed girls who knew too much, spoke too sharply, calculated too quickly, each one labeled unstable, each one slowly broken, except Clara. She didn't resist the regime. She absorbed it, memorized it, every hallway, every schedule, every crack in the nurse's voice before sedation. She began mapping the rotations of guards, predicting visits, recording who cried in their sleep and who only pretend. And within weeks, she was carving numbers into her bedpost. Within months, the other girls stopped speaking her name aloud, because Clara wasn't just surviving. She was watching the system from within, and when a system is being watched, it begins to break. Let me be clear, this wasn't just one girl in one institution. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous, awareness that could not be contained. It was the autumn of 1894 when a letter arrived at the desk of Dr. Emil Harrow, a neurolinguist at King's College London. The envelope was wax-sealed, but the wax bore no crest, only the impression of a broken hourglass. Inside, no greeting, no sender, only one sentence handwritten in a perfect spiral across the page. The hour you stop asking when is the hour you'll remember what. Harrow, known for his studies in linguistic patterning and mass suggestion, became obsessed. He published nothing that year. Instead, he turned inward, examining the spaces between words, the breath between syllables, the microseconds between thoughts, and then he vanished. When they broke into his flat, they found no furniture, no clothes, no food, just a single metronome ticking in the center of the room. And on the wall, carved in rhythmic stabs with a surgical scalpel, was a phrase repeated exactly 3,333 times. It speaks in seconds. But what speaks? That's where the horror sharpens. Because behind every great empire, Rome, Britain, Silicon Valley, lies not just the power of violence, but the power of rhythm. To beat the drum of civilization so predictably, the herd marches itself into the slaughter. The clockmaker, whatever he was, understood that language alone couldn't enslave a species, but tempo could. Predict a man's rhythms, and you own his fate. Break his rhythms, and you set him free. But only for a moment, because the machine is patient. You'll feel it too, won't you? When you wake at 3:33 a.m. with no reason. When your heart skips in sync with a sound you don't remember hearing. When you say, "I don't have time," without ever asking who took it. That's when you're closest to the truth, not because you're waking up, but because something ancient, something timed, is watching you stir, and it's nearly time for your role to begin. At precisely 11:11 p.m. on December 1st, 1894, a thunderless lightning strike hit the Royal Greenwich Observatory. No fire, no visible damage, but for exactly 61 seconds, every timepiece synchronized to the observatory lost its signal. Globally, clocks stopped, trains stalled, telegraph lines hissed with static, and then, as if nothing had happened, time resumed. But those 61 seconds, they were stolen. Not erased, replaced. A week later, the Times of London reported an unprecedented spike in identical dreams across the city. Dozens of unrelated people described the same vision. A long corridor lined with mirrors, each reflection delayed by exactly 5 seconds. At the end of the hallway, a man turning a brass key into the back of a boy's skull and whispering, "Now you'll never lose track of time again." The story was buried by Christmas, but a single archived report from the Royal Society noted a disturbing coincidence. All the dreamers had one thing in common. They'd handled or worn a timepiece manufactured in Manchester between 1883 and 1885. Yes, the clockmaker's years. You still think this was about murders? No. The bodies were a distraction. Sacrifices to veil the true operation. The mass calibration of thought across an emerging industrial empire. You think factory bells and school chimes are for order? They're for programming, to condition obedience through predictable disruption. The clockmaker's real masterpiece wasn't murder, it was mass entrainment, making millions move in rhythm, obey in rhythm, consume in rhythm. And here's the most twisted part, the mechanism still runs, not in brass, not in gears, but in algorithms. Your calendar, your screen, your heartbeat, now synced to metrics you never chose. Tick, scroll, dot, click. Repeat. That's not freedom, it's compliance, measured in milliseconds. You didn't choose your bypass. He did. And now that you've noticed the sync, you're beginning to fall out of time, exactly as he planned. The photograph surfaced in 1963 in a sealed archive mislabeled Acoustic Failures, Naval Experiments. But the photo had nothing to do with sonar. It was a faded black and white image of a Victorian street, fogged, eerily still, but right at the center stood a man staring directly into the camera, smiling. His face wasn't blurred, it was too clear, too modern, too knowing, and stitched into the lapel of his coat was a familiar shape, a broken hourglass embroidered in silver thread. Historians dismissed it as coincidence. AI-enhanced scans, however, revealed something else, something no one had anticipated. When the image was run through harmonic resonance filters, it produced sound. Not a soundtrack, not static, but a ticking, precise, relentless, exactly 88.8 beats per minute, the rhythm of a resting human heart under hypnosis. That's when researchers realized the photo wasn't just an image, it was a carrier, a trap. The clockmaker had encoded rhythm into light itself, turning photographs into tools of entrainment. You didn't need a gear or a bell, you only needed to look. The deeper horror? He had discovered a way to embed temporal instructions into objects, to sync the human nervous system with invisible commands simply by exposure, through sound, through light, through time. That's why the victims were found posed, arms arranged, bodies staged in unnatural symmetry. They weren't just killed, they were tuned, calibrated like metronomes, each death a signal, a note in a larger melody. One designed not to shock the public, but to condition it. Look around you now. Why do trends cycle every 10 years? Why do economic crashes occur in repeating intervals? Why does fear return like a season? Because the clockmaker isn't gone. He's just perfected his silence. He doesn't need to kill anymore. Because now, you kill your own thoughts for him, every single day. There was a boy in Whitechapel, barefoot, 11 years old, half-starved and mute. The constables called him Ticker because he carried a rusted pocket watch he never let go of. Not even while sleeping. It had no hands, no glass, no ticking. But he said it still told him things. When asked where he got it, he pointed to a lamppost and whispered, for the first and only time in his life, "He gave it to me when the light blinked out." That same night, 3 constables went missing. No struggle, no blood. Their last recorded location, exactly beneath that same lamppost. The next morning, Ticker was gone too. All they found was the watch, and for the first time in decades, it ticked. Loud enough to crack the glass on the inspector's desk. Forensic analysis, modern, digital, later revealed that the ticking wasn't random. It was Morse code, a message looped infinitely. The body is a metronome. Stop the heart and the thought dies. Start the heart and the will returns. It was a formula, a warning, a blueprint. The clockmaker had never been interested in chaos. That was child's play. His obsession was pause. To create stillness so vast, so absolute, that a man would abandon his will rather than confront the silence inside himself. That was the real purpose of the killings. Not terror, not spectacle, calibration. Each victim selected not for who they were, but for what they represented in the human psyche. Fear, faith, guilt, doubt, ambition. Symbols tuned like chimes on a cathedral tower, struck down at perfect intervals to send a message only the subconscious could hear. And you, watching this now, you're already sinking to the rhythm. That discomfort in your spine, that sudden awareness of your breathing, it's not coincidence. It's recognition, because you felt him before, in the waiting room, in the silence after a loved one's final breath. In the moment before the phone rings, when you know it will, he is not a man, he is timing itself, and he's been watching, for when you finally hear him call. They called her the clockmaker's widow, but no marriage certificate ever existed, no census record, no birth, no death, only a single mention, buried in an 1896 medical ledger from Bethlehem Royal Hospital. Female, 040, pale, silent. Refuses food unless brought precisely at 4:44 a.m. Only phrase spoken in 7 years of observation. He still winds the world. She drew spirals on the walls, hundreds of them, but not random, each one mathematically perfect. When overlaid, the spirals formed a map, not of land, not of stars, of time. More specifically, ruptures in it, points where time did not behave linearly, where events folded, repeated, bled, locations where he had passed through, hospitals, clock towers, train stations, morgues. All places where the same anomaly occurred, laughter recorded at impossible frequencies, human voices resonating in the subsonic range, too low to hear, but felt in the gut. When scientists played the recordings at high speed, they discovered a pattern. The laughter, layered thousands of times, spelled out a sentence in Latin: Tempus est servus, nunc est dominus. Time is the servant. Now it is the master. She had known, she had seen it. Not the man, but the pulse that followed him, the rhythmic hum of power stepping into empty spaces. The invisible beat that replaced free will with habit, intuition with routine. She died in silence. No known cause. But at 4:44 a.m., every timepiece in Bethlehem stopped, and the nurse on duty reported something that was never officially recorded. All 66 patients in the East Wing turned toward the wall at the exact same time and whispered, "He resets us when we begin to remember." You think this is story, folklore? That's the lie he allows, because disbelief is the final protection. But once you see the gears in the walls, once you notice the rhythm beneath your own choices, it's already too late. The world is wound, and the man who winds it never left. In 1971, a team of underground engineers restoring London's oldest sewer lines uncovered a sealed iron hatch, unmarked, unlisted, and buried behind 14 feet of brick. Inside was a narrow stone corridor, dry, untouched, and lined with mirrors, but none of them showed the workers' reflections. Instead, each pane displayed a different moment in time, not imagined, recorded. A bombing raid in 1941, a duel from 1810, a woman giving birth in complete darkness. One mirror showed a man with a silver-threaded coat standing silently in an empty room. The moment any worker approached that pane, their watch stopped. Every single time. One man ignored protocol. He reached out to touch the mirror. His heart stopped mid-beat. No trauma, no poison, no mark. Just stillness, perfect and irreversible, and scrawled into the dust on the wall behind the mirror were 3 words: "Do not awake." The corridor was sealed again, this time by military order, the report buried, but one document leaked, a technician's log smeared in graphite. It contained a series of calculations, and a warning: he's not coming back. He's already here, waking piece by piece, soul by soul. Every memory you forget, that's him. Every dream you abandon, that's him. He doesn't kill to destroy. He kills to rewrite. That's why the victims were arranged like clock hands, why their limbs pointed to times, not places, why every name in the files begins with the same letter of the hour they were taken. He wasn't leaving messages for police. He was leaving instructions to himself. Reassembling his body across time, 1 second at a time, in deaths, in silences, in spaces between heartbeats. And every once in a while, you feel it, don't you? A déjà vu that sticks, a corner turned that shouldn't be there, a ticking in your ears when no watch is near. That's not madness, that's not stress, that's him. Remember this moment, because the second you forget, he takes another step forward. By the time the coroner's ledger reached the hands of Dr. Elliot Frey, it was already charred around the edges, like someone had tried to burn the truth but couldn't finish the job. The first thing Dr. Frey noticed was the ink. Brown, not black. Dried blood. Human. But not from a pen. From a syringe. The entries were clinical, methodical, dozens of unnamed victims catalogued only by number, tooth pattern, and time of death, precise to the millisecond. Victim, number 088, 3:03:03 a.m. Victim, number 089, 3:06:06 a.m. Victim, 090, 3:09:09 a.m. Each death 3 minutes, 3 seconds apart. But it was the notation beside victim number 091 that stopped Frey cold, scrawled, jagged, and in a different hand. He corrected the tempo. I was too slow. That was the only one with a name. Dr. Lionel Hark, former timekeeping specialist for the British Royal Observatory, presumed dead in 1899 during a lab explosion that destroyed an entire wing. Except the handwriting matched his exactly, and the blood matched him too, meaning this ledger had been written after his death. Frey submitted a request to investigate further. By morning, every copy of the ledger, digital and physical, was gone. His credentials revoked, his home emptied. But on his office wall, behind the plaster, was one final note, etched into the stone with a scalpel. Time isn't passing, it's closing, like jaws, like a trap. He is the silence between the ticks, and when there are no more ticks, he walks free. If that makes no sense to you, good. You're still safe, still blind. But if that sent a chill down your back, if you suddenly noticed how loud your clock just got, you've already heard him breathing through the walls. He's not a man. He's not a ghost. He's a conductor. And every time someone dies on the second, his orchestra tunes up again. A phonograph cylinder was found beneath the floorboards of an abandoned tailor's shop on Fleet Street, dated 1887, the same year as the first recorded laughter killing. But when restored and played, the voice on the wax wasn't Victorian. It was modern, male, calm, and disturbingly familiar to anyone who'd heard survivors describe the laughing man's voice. The recording began with 17 seconds of silence. Then came the words, delivered slowly, each syllable measured like a ticking clock. You will think this is the past. You will believe this voice is dead. But I am not memory. I am rehearsal. The voice listed coordinates, moments, names, all mismatched across time. And then laughter, not from the man, but from dozens of other voices layered in, men, women, children, but reversed. When the audio was flipped and filtered, every laugh became a scream. Engineers broke down the waveform. Hidden inside were images, not metaphors, but real photographic stills encoded in sound. Each showed a person just before death, eyes wide, lips parted, and in the corner of every frame, a man's silhouette barely visible, same height, same tilt of the head, always watching. When one technician stared too long at frame 17, she began to convulse, not from fear, from laughter, uncontrollable, choking laughter. She tore out her own vocal cords to make it stop. Before passing out, she wrote a single word in her own blood. Drafted, not murdered, not haunted, recruited. Because the laughing man doesn't just kill, he selects. Those who've been broken by time, bent by grief, shattered by pattern. They are his choir. He doesn't create monsters, he amplifies them. And if you've ever felt joy at someone else's pain, if you've ever laughed when you should have wept, then the thread is already in your throat. You just haven't heard the pull yet. In a sealed cabinet beneath the British Museum, item numbered 4436E, sits a pocket watch with no hands. At first glance, it's broken, harmless. But every curator assigned to it vanished within 7 days. The watch doesn't tick, it clicks, only once, random, in the dead of night, and whoever hears that click begins to change, not in body, but in perception. One described hearing voices behind glass. Another said she could see conversations happening 5 seconds before they were spoken. One man claimed that every human face began to look like his own, twisted into expressions he didn't remember making. Then, without warning, each of them disappeared. No struggle, no trace. But the watch, always left behind, pristine, waiting for the next hand to touch it. In 1923, an occultist named Corbin Vale smuggled the watch out during renovations. He claimed it belonged to the choirmaster, a being that lives not in space but between seconds. Vale kept detailed notes in his journal. He believed that time is not a line but a looping score, and the laughing man was its composer. A fragment reads, "He cannot move freely, yet He needs synchronization. Each laugh, each death, each exact second is a note. When the measure is complete, he plays. Vale's final journal entry was scrawled sideways across the inside cover. No ink, just scratches, like fingernails dragged against leather. Too late. I heard it. The click. The baton is raised. The breath before the downbeat. After that, his body was found twisted into a seated position, eyes wide, mouth open, as if mid-laughter, mummified overnight. And the worst part? His final facial expression exactly matches the photo from 1887, the first victim of the Laughing Man. Different century, same face, same smile. There is no timeline, only a stage, and he's almost done tuning. In a remote wing of St. Agatha's Asylum, buried beneath London since 1871, there exists a room permanently sealed by order of Parliament. Room B3X. Officially, it was meant for high-risk auditory delusions, but the nurses had another name for it, the echo cell. No one screamed in that room. They laughed, non-stop. A soft, breathless chuckling that started on the third night after a patient was placed inside. It would begin at 3:33 a.m. exactly. Always. Patients who entered B3X were sane. Epileptics, veterans, melancholics. Within 72 hours they would be whispering strange metronomic phrases. 4/4 time. He likes it even. All rests must be earned. Then the laughter would begin. Sometimes it was soft. Sometimes it sounded like a crowd at a theater, muffled through stone. One nurse reported hearing her own childhood giggle echoing from behind the door, but she had no siblings, and no one had ever recorded her voice. Eventually, the ward's head physician, Dr. Thorne, ordered an experimental test. He placed a phonograph recorder in the room for one night, with no patient inside. When they played the cylinder back, there was no laughter, only a single, steady beat. It sounded mechanical, like a conductor's baton tapping wood. Tick, 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 tick. Then silence, and then one word, whispered by an impossible voice. Now. That same day, Dr. Thorne threw himself down the central stairwell. His suicide note? A single phrase written 104 times. The performance begins when no one is watching. The government sealed B3X that week, but those who walk the halls late at night say they still hear it, faint giggling just past the final corridor. Not childish, not joyful, rehearsed, because madness isn't chaos, it's pattern without mercy, and the Laughing Man doesn't speak in words, he speaks in timing. In the waxy grey of London's underground archives lies a forgotten police ledger, its spine cracked, its ink faded to the color of dried blood. Inside, a single case file stamped revoked. Something almost never done by Scotland Yard. Case number 287G, the Hollow Choir Incident, dated November 11, 1887. Filed and closed in less than 24 hours. The location was an orphanage once known as St. Winifred's Haven, razed in 1901 without explanation. Before its demolition, 37 children and 5 caretakers vanished overnight. No signs of struggle. Beds untouched, plates still warm with uneaten stew. Only one thing remained, a set of children's shoes arranged in a perfect semicircle in the chapel, each pair facing forward, as if attending a performance. At the altar, there was a black wax cylinder, still spinning. When recovered and played, investigators reported no sound, only a feeling. A deep, nauseating sense of being watched from inside your own skin. Some officers reported hearing choir music inside their skulls, but backward, a melody without resolution. One constable, Edwin Blake, collapsed minutes after listening. Before his seizure, he shouted, "It's not music, it's a lock made of sound." He never recovered. A month later, his wife was institutionalized after claiming her husband had begun to appear in her mirrors, grinning, humming lullabies no one else could hear. The chapel was burned, the land was sold for development, but nothing has ever stood there for more than 9 months. Each structure collapses from unexplainable foundational failure. Locals say they hear faint lullabies when walking past, always sung by children. And if you stand still long enough, you'll hear someone behind you take a breath, like a conductor preparing the next cue. Because the Laughing Man doesn't always kill, sometimes he teaches, and when his pupils disappear, they don't die, they join the arrangement. There is a painting in the basement of the Royal Academy of Arts. It is unsigned, unlabeled, and never displayed, covered by a black velvet cloth and stored under condition, do not unwrap. Its presence is known only by a handful of archivists, and even fewer dare to speak its name. The Dress Rehearsal, an 1888 oil canvas, discovered abandoned in an East End theater that had burned to the ground with no survivors. The fire, strangely, left the painting untouched. It depicts a narrow stage, with gas lamps flickering weakly. 16 figures stand frozen mid-step. Dancers, musicians, a conductor, all suspended in what appears to be the final moment before performance. But there is something wrong. Each figure has a duplicate shadow. One cast by the footlights, the other cast in reverse, against logic, trailing upward across the stage ceiling. And in the orchestra pit sits a figure with no face, only a long smile painted onto porcelain skin, gloved hands raised, mid-baton swing. Most disturbing of all, if you look long enough, the painting seems to breathe. The cloth meant to cover it sometimes moves on its own, like wind tugging fabric that shouldn't flutter. In 1936, a restoration apprentice accidentally uncovered the canvas for 47 seconds. Security found him later, trying to staple sheet music into his own arms, claiming, "I must join the score, I know my part now." He never painted again. The Royal Academy attempted to destroy it. Every attempt failed. Water peeled off, fire turned cold, even acid evaporated, so they hid it. But according to a 1971 memo uncovered in the Thatcher archives, the painting reappears at random in different parts of the building, as though it's choosing new observers. And if you stare into the faceless conductor's grin long enough, some swear they hear faint, synchronized tapping, like a metronome in another room. Because this isn't a portrait, it's a window. And somewhere, just behind that smiling mask, he's watching you watch him. In December of 1887, a single-page letter arrived at the office of Inspector Horace Bell, the man originally tasked with identifying the serial killer the public had begun calling the Laughing Man. The letter was unsigned, unsealed, no stamp, simply folded and left on his desk, despite the door being locked, despite the guards outside swearing no one had entered. The paper was ivory, heavy, smeared faintly with a gray dust like ash. Its contents: a musical score, no words, no instructions, just 16 bars of complex dissonant piano notation, notes that bent natural harmony and broke traditional structure. At the bottom, one handwritten sentence: "You've been listening your whole life, you just didn't know it." Bell, at first, dismissed it as a hoax, the work of a sick copycat or deranged musician. But something bothered him. One night he handed the page to his pianist wife Eleanor and asked her to play it, just once, to prove there was nothing sinister about sound. She hesitated, said it felt wrong under her fingers, but she played. Within seconds, the chandelier above them shattered, not from impact, but from resonance. The mirror cracked across both of their faces in perfect symmetry. Eleanor stood up, dazed, and walked out into the snow. She was never seen again. Bell spent the next 2 years unraveling the origins of the music. He found traces of it in ancient Roman ossuary markings, early Hebrew mysticism, and even Chinese zither tunings dated back to 1200 BCE. It was not a melody. It was a structure, a sonic architecture, something meant to call, not to comfort. After Bell went missing in 1890, a private journal of his was discovered, hidden beneath floorboards in his study. Its final page simply read, "He doesn't kill, he doesn't chase, he doesn't even move. He waits until you hear your part." The music was never meant for ears. That's what the Harrogate memo claimed. A now buried document circulated briefly in 1888 between senior officials in the British Home Office and select figures from the Royal Society. Its contents have since been scrubbed from public record, but a single, smuggled copy survives, found decades later in the lining of an asylum patient's overcoat. The memo detailed an experiment conducted beneath the old St. Basil's Hospital, a place long since demolished and paved over by modern London traffic. But beneath the ground, the foundations still rot. 7 patients, each with acute schizophrenia and reported auditory hallucinations of rhythmic laughter. Each was exposed to a slightly altered arrangement of the Laughing Man's musical notation, played through phonographs in padded rooms. None of them survived. But they didn't die the way you'd think. They stopped breathing, yes, but not from pain or even trauma. Instead, their faces bore expressions of relief, as if something had finally made sense, as if they had found their place in the harmony. Their final EEG readings were not flat, but structured, as if their brains had begun playing music of their own. Doctors called it impossible. One asylum worker, who later fled to America under a new name, left behind a single quote before vanishing. "The music isn't music. It's an instruction manual for the human soul. Once you hear it, you belong to it." The Harrogate memo concluded with a chilling recommendation. All future attempts to analyze or recreate the sequence must cease immediately. The arrangement is not a phenomenon. It is an entity, a conductor that does not reside in time but awakens when its score is played. Some say the Laughing Man was never a man at all, but a role, like first chair in a symphony that has no end. And the more you study him, the more you tune yourself to his key. In the winter of 1889, a wax cylinder was discovered buried behind the wall of an abandoned London tailor shop. The shop had been gutted by fire the year before. No known survivors, no clear cause, only scorched floorboards, and this single relic sealed inside a brick cavity. It was labeled, in neat black ink, "For the Fifth Ear." The Ministry of Internal Affairs confiscated the cylinder within hours of its discovery, reportedly citing a threat to public perception. But not before it was played by a young linguist, a man named Jonathan Keene, 31, Oxford graduate, phonetic savant. He believed it to be an early dialect or religious chant. What he heard instead, according to his notebook, was laughter, but from the inside out, not from lungs or lips, something deeper, like thought made sound. Keene wrote obsessively for 5 days after hearing it. He claimed the recording was not captured by any machine, but had somehow grown into the wax, like a fossil formed from emotional sediment. His final entry reads, "I can't hear my own voice anymore. When I try to speak, I mouth something else's words. It's not possession, it's rehearsal." And then he vanished. The room he was staying in was found perfectly clean, bed made, kettle warm, a chair turned slightly toward the window. But beneath the floorboards, investigators found fingernail scratchings, an entire musical staff etched into wood, with 16 bars, the same bars from the Laughing Man's original letter. Only this time, a final line had been added, not in notation, but in cursive, carved over and over again in the grain. "He smiles because he knows the end, and it's beautiful." To this day, that wax cylinder remains sealed in a private ministry archive marked Black Vault, Echelon 4. It is not labeled dangerous, it is labeled incomplete. And in the silence between its grooves, they say there are still whispers, waiting for the right listener to finish the song. By early 1890, whispers of the Laughing Man had spread far beyond London, but they weren't coming from newspapers or penny dreadfuls. They came from dreams. Men who had never met spoke the same phrases in their sleep. Women reported waking up humming a tune they swore they'd never heard before. Children were found sketching the same crude smile over and over, a mouth too wide, too thin, stretching past the borders of the page. One doctor in Kent compiled over 77 separate patient cases in a single month. Different backgrounds, different classes. No connections, except one. Each drew the same face, a faceless man dressed in black, standing just outside the frame, and always, always laughing. It was around this time that a peculiar event took place in Westminster Abbey. A midnight choir rehearsal, closed to the public, was interrupted by an unexplained blackout. In those 12 minutes of darkness, 8 of the 10 choir boys present began to hum, in perfect, identical harmony. Not the hymn they had been practicing, not anything in the Abbey's collection, but the Laughing Man's melody. The choir master, Father Elgin Rhodes, described it in his report as a music not sung by the boys, but through them. They sounded relieved, as if they had returned to something they'd always belonged to, some secret place beneath their skin. 2 days later, Father Rhodes burned every hymnal in the abbey and was found wandering barefoot in the Thames. Before slipping beneath the water, he was heard whispering, "He's tuning the city, one voice at a time." And then, he was gone. Since then, the official records have been closed. The Laughing Man's name appears nowhere in the archives. But the music, it hasn't stopped. And those who hear it, even faintly, describe the same final feeling before they vanish. It's not fear, it's not madness, it's belonging. The last known photograph connected to the Laughing Man surfaced in the spring of 1891. It was found in the attic of the Holloway Sanitarium, tucked behind a portrait of the institution's founder, a faded daguerreotype, cracked down the middle, no name, no date, but the image was unmistakable. A group of patients seated in a garden, all looking in different directions, except one, a tall, thin figure standing at the far left, unsmiling, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something just out of frame. His hands are folded, but if you look closer, you'll see his fingers are moving, not twitching, conducting. A faint blur surrounds him, like the motion couldn't be fully captured by the lens. And behind his back, barely visible in the ivy, is a symbol. A circle, broken by a single vertical line. The same symbol scratched into the asylum floors. The same symbol etched into the wax cylinder. The same symbol found behind the eyes of a patient who clawed his own face in silence. A patient who, in his final moments, wrote one phrase backward across his cell wall. "He lives in the rests." Music is not only the notes, it's the space between them, the gaps, the silences. And in those silences, something breathes. Several modern music theorists who've studied the Laughing Man's melody, reconstructed from fragmented records and forbidden texts, came to a chilling conclusion. The melody itself is incomplete by design. It pulls the mind toward what's missing, and whatever is missing isn't absence, it's invitation. A request, a door, slightly ajar in the back of your thoughts, not to walk through, but to listen through. Those who've heard the full version, or believe they have, describe a final sound, a laugh. But not like a man's laugh, not joy, not mockery, not madness, a laugh that sounds like recognition, like it sees you, and it's glad. By late 1891, the British Museum quietly closed Gallery 14B, a room known only to a handful of archivists. It had housed an experimental exhibit, The Human Echo, an array of early phonographs, throat-singing cylinders, and a strange artifact of unknown origin, a copper ear trumpet, 5 feet tall, mounted to a marble base. It wasn't listed in any catalog. According to internal memos, the artifact amplified absence, recording no sound, yet playing back a distinct pattern hours after silence. And what played was always laughter. Faint, inhuman, distorted by space, not by machine. 2 attendants assigned to maintain the exhibit reported hallucinations within days. One claimed to hear his own name spoken in tones his mother had used, even though she'd been dead for 17 years. The other was found standing still at the base of the trumpet, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, humming a tune with no melody. When questioned, he said, "I wasn't singing, I was answering." After a private investigation, the museum sealed the room. Not with locks, with salt. And in the curator's final statement, now buried in the Royal Archives, he wrote, "It's not just an echo, it's the memory of being heard, and it wants to be heard again." Scholars who attempted to replicate the phenomena found themselves haunted not by the sounds, but by coincidences. Missed calls where the line clicked before ringing. Music boxes playing by themselves, always the same 3 notes. Dreams of mirrors where their own reflections whispered before they moved, and always, without exception, a sudden sense, while alone, that someone in the room was smiling. We are conditioned to fear violence. We are trained to resist madness. But no one prepares for the moment you realize you're part of a song you never agreed to hear, and worse, that you already know the chorus. They say the Laughing Man vanished in 1892. But that's not true. He didn't vanish. He changed frequency. By the end of that year, several unexplained events rippled across Europe. None were publicly connected, but behind closed doors, in MI5, in the Vatican archives, in the Société des Observateurs de l'Homme, a new phrase began to appear in sealed correspondences. Auditory contagion spreading through nonverbal cues. Highly intelligent, possibly conscious. One such event occurred in a Vienna opera house during rehearsal. Every instrument in the orchestra stopped mid-note, not by command, but because each musician claimed simultaneously that they could hear a voice in their instrument. Not through din. The conductor reportedly wept, dropped his baton and muttered, "He's rewriting the silence." That conductor, Anton Meyer, took his life 3 nights later after carving sheet music into his own chest. When decoded, the notes matched the pattern found in the Holloway Sanitarium and the Abbey blackout. Another event unfolded in a Paris asylum. Patients who had never spoken a word suddenly began humming, in unison, whenever the moonlight hit their barred windows. No melody, just the harmonic dissonance of breath and anticipation. A single word was found scrawled on the ceiling of every cell. Encore. What's most disturbing is this. The laughing man was never caught. Because there was no one to catch, no face, no fingerprint, no origin. Because he was never a man, not in the way we understand it. He was, and still is, an idea disguised as a sound. A presence that lives in human perception. A parasite that rides the back of music waiting for a listener to believe it's just a song. And once you believe that, he begins to arrange you. One breath at a time, one note at a time, until your silence matches his. There's an unsettling pattern buried deep in the oldest wax recordings of the 1880s, cylinders thought damaged, scratched, or corroded by time. But spectral analysis in 2004 revealed something else. Not noise, not decay, but embedded sound, nearly subsonic. When processed through modern software, these recordings revealed the same 7-note motif, identical across 3 continents, multiple devices, and decades apart. A motif that scholars now call the hum that watches. No composer claimed authorship, no machine was built to produce it, and yet it appears again and again, in lost piano rolls, damaged music boxes, even in the modulation patterns of a Morse code signal sent during the 1889 Great Storm. And when researchers aligned these sounds to a human EEG scan, a horrifying discovery was made. The rhythm matches the exact neural spike of pre-laughter recognition, that fraction of a second when the brain anticipates a joke or a strange familiarity, only no joke comes. Just that pause, that weightless, suspended moment before laughter, and the sense that something is about to reveal itself. One professor from King's College, a skeptic of all Laughing Man lore, conducted a blind listening study in 2009. He gathered 22 volunteers to hear a cleaned-up reconstruction of the motif. What happened next was recorded on tape, but never released. Every listener froze, then smiled, then began humming. Not the melody they had heard, but the next part, the part that wasn't played. Somehow, they knew it. The professor fled London the next week. He now lives in a monastery in Cyprus, doesn't speak, doesn't write. But when he sleeps, his roommates say he breathes in rhythm. 7 beats on the inhale, a held rest on the exhale. And sometimes, not often but often enough, he laughs in his sleep, softly, like someone remembering, an inside joke the world was never supposed to hear. If you've made it this far, you've already heard it, not with your ears, but with that nervous knowing in your chest, the way your skin listens when the room gets too quiet. That's where he waits. In the stillness between explanation and intuition, not haunting, not hiding, tuning. Because the laughing man was never a figure in the shadows, never a face in the alley. He is a design, a structure, a frequency that builds itself out of belief. Every witness who's seen him describes something different. A tall man with no eyes, a child's silhouette holding an adult's grin, a mouth in the wrong place. But what remains constant is this: they always hear it before they see him. A sound that doesn't belong, a melody that doesn't resolve, a laugh that arrives before the joke, and once you recognize it, once you name it, you become a note in the chorus. Historians erased him, police denied him, scientists encrypted him, but folklore did the one thing that ensured his survival. It made him a story, and stories are remembered. Not for what they are, but for what they make us feel. That subtle dread when music stops mid-bar. That smile you didn't mean to smile. That whisper you thought was the wind, until it said your name. He doesn't need to be believed. He only needs to be heard. So tonight, if you hear a faint tune as you close your eyes, a hum with no source, and you feel your lips twitch upward for no reason at all, don't answer it. Because the laughing man is still composing, and he's saving a place in the final verse.